All right. Welcome to another episode of the show. It's good to see you or get feedback from you and have you listening. So, thank you for being here. Today, I'd love to look at EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy, different from emotional freedom technique, which is tapping. So, this is actually a form of psychotherapy. It was founded and formatted or created by Dr. Sue Johnson. She's got a book on it as well, which I will definitely be drawing upon, and is an amazing read if you are struggling with your relationships, any of them. It is focused on couples, but I'd say that this has been transformational in me even understanding myself better and understanding how other people's actions rub me the wrong way and how I respond to those things rubbing me the wrong way, allowing me to let go of things that rub me the wrong way, which is definitely an invaluable tool when it comes to dealing with other people, because who doesn't have challenges with other people? I mean, no matter what you do for work, whether it's family relationships, work relationships, personal, like no matter what it is that you do, it's challenging to deal with others. So I hope that this episode will bring us closer to understanding what EFT is, help us to understand how to feel closer to our partners, more confident about our relationships, clear on how to turn really conflict into connection. So that's my broad goal, which how do we turn conflict into connection? It can feel really heated, and certainly in one podcast episode, we can only get so far. It's going to take a lot of reflection on your part if you want to actually evaluate your marriage or your relationships. So I'm here to serve as a guide, share a bit about my experience with working with an EFT therapist, and how you can either work within yourself or maybe go down this road on your own and do some investigation. If you want to go on the road of just checking this out for yourself, I highly recommend Dr. Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight. There are 7 conversations that you're meant to go through. Ideally, you do this with your partner in order to understand how to argue better, essentially. And then to, at the end of it, not have the circular arguments that you have. So a lot of conventional therapy or counseling, in my experience, looks at, let's say, your past, your childhood, how to communicate effectively, tools. And while those things might be good, I think a lot of the time in a heat of an argument, tools and processes or fair fighting rules or any of that kind of thing sort of gets thrown out the window because we're so emotionally heated. And that can happen in, an instant, truly an instant. And in reading the book and working with a therapist, it is true. If you look at the last conflict that you had with anyone, but specifically, I think with your partner, how quickly did it escalate? It can be just someone looking at you the wrong way, saying the wrong thing in the wrong way. So maybe their tone of voice, turning away, their body language. So it's really fascinating to me because it can be in an instant that we go from everything's fine to stress, on high alert, feeling at the core of it really unsafe, or some level of fear that something is not okay with us. And so in the book, there are 7 transforming conversations that Dr. Johnson goes through. And I'll just sort of list those out and explain them for anyone that hasn't read it or is interested. So you start by recognizing your demon dialogues, is what she calls it. And essentially the idea is that they're destructive and negative remarks that happen in a conversation, and you need to get to the root of the problem. So often when we argue on a content level. So you didn't pick up the dog, you didn't pick up the kids, you're late, what that person actually or factually did or said. And we argue on that content level, thinking that that's the problem, that, oh, if you just weren't late, if you just didn't say that anymore, if you just didn't do that anymore, we'd be okay. And oftentimes, well, one, your partner doesn't really hear you because they are shut down or they're in a defensive mode. So the way that you go about this is so important, which is why I was saying, right, all of this sort of can spiral out of control almost in an instant, and it moves so quickly. So one of the things that we did in EFT was really look at some situations, and they can be there are daily situations. There can be, and even in my work with couples, I've had things like using the partner's ruler, or something to do with a coffee mug. These things can be very slight and they can seem insignificant. Why do you care if I use your ruler? What's the problem? Why do you care if I'm in the backyard gardening? What's the issue? Or, okay, I said I didn't want to go to your friend's party. So what? And really, it's not about the party. It's not about the ruler. It's not about the content. So I think that's one of the biggest realizations I had in the first conversations. And I think these 7 transforming conversations, while they are in the book and you can do them with your partner, I think that from what I've seen in EFT and in my coaching practice, that these 7 conversations are really what happen with couples throughout a coaching engagement. So you have to start with being aware of your cycle, of the dance that you're doing in your relationship. So what is that pattern that you're in? And oftentimes it repeats, just in different contexts or different subject matter. So a lot of times, and there are 3 that Dr. Johnson talks about. There can be, finding the bad guy. So that's like the blame game, essentially. So either both partners or one partner starts to criticize and blame, and then the other one just lays it on top. So you never take out the garbage, well, you're always messing up the kitchen. You just layer it on, and it becomes who's worse and who's the bad guy, instead of finding any kind of solution or getting back to a loving place. Instead, you're both enemies. So there's that. There's also another one that's she calls it a polka, but essentially the idea is that it's a dance, and oftentimes it's triggered by a raw spot, and we all have them, right? There are things that, and this is where, yes, maybe it is from childhood, maybe it is something that your mom or dad or parental figure used to do. So that could be a raw spot for you, because hey, your dad was always late picking you up from school, and you thought that he didn't care about you. So when someone else is late, now that's a sore spot, a rough spot, a tough spot. So I think that with that, we really need to start to consider, okay, what are those spots for us? And what dance does that pull us into? And it can pull us into a dance of, okay, so when such and such happens, so when you're late picking up the kids, or when you're late for a date, then immediately I feel scared. And this is a base emotion, right? So angry, scared, shame, sad, those sorts of feelings. And then I tell myself, so what are you telling yourself it means? Because right away we make things mean something, we give things meaning, and the event in and of itself could bother one person and not another. And the reason that something bothers one person and not another is because of the meaning that we ascribe to it, the meaning that we attach to the event. So, okay, well, you were late. That makes me angry, scared, frustrated, sad. And I make it mean that you don't care about me, or I'm not important to you, or you don't respect me. So what are those kinds of things that right away, when your partner is telling you or doing something that you don't like, where do you go? Pretty much right away with that. So it's not just, oh, you were late and that's frustrating. What can we do as a couple against the lateness, which is the event? It's more like, oh, okay, now I'm not important, or you don't care about me. And we go kind of to this really extreme place. So that's a demon dialogue for sure. You kind of get into this pattern or this cycle, this polka that she calls it. You can call it whatever you want, vortex, spiral, but you spiral into this pattern. So oftentimes one person can be maybe the criticizing person and the other person gets quiet, or you both get louder and then it goes higher volume, the idea of high volume, low volume discussions or communication styles. So if somebody's yelling at me, oftentimes I might escalate, but at some point I shut down and then I want to be alone. And that's something that I do that other people, for example, might get just louder and louder and louder, feeling like they have to be aggressive and assert themselves. So there are different styles. The third Demon dialogue, if you will, is that sort of withdrawal and shut out, and it can be one person or both. And if both people have sort of frozen and withdrawn from the relationship, that's probably the scariest time, because the question is, do we even have a relationship anymore? If we're both frozen and withdrawn from the relationship, then what kind of relationship is it? And are we willing to come back to the table about it? Or are we just living as roommates in our marriage and living two separate lives and apart? Because this spiral, usually after that spiral or that dance has been repeated so many times that it's so entrenched that you just assume, okay, they're just going to criticize me, or okay, they're just going to abandon me. I just feel so alone that no matter what I say. And that's normally the pattern. And in her books, she talks about how, and I think this is potentially flawed, because I think we can be both. And she does say that, but she says most of the time women feel alone, and then they'll sort of nag or complain, right? They get upset, and then the man will retreat or withdraw, not knowing what to say, often with the not good enough kind of dialogue of, okay, I can't, and nothing I do works. I can't do anything right. You're just going to criticize me, so I'm just going to be quiet. So again, it depends on the person's experiences, and if they go and they kind of fight for it and get more aggressive, or if their style is to withdraw. So you'll know which person you are, and you can be that person in different scenarios, right? So, I mean, you can be the withdrawing person in one relationship, and you can be more of the aggressive person or the criticizing person in another relationship. So interesting to note, okay, am I like this with everyone, or do I have different styles? So this whole theory is also based off of Bowlby's work, who's another psychotherapist who worked on attachment theory. So pretty much Dr. Johnson built off of Bowlby's work on this. And so there's secure, there's avoidant, there's disorganized, there's a ambivalent, or there's anxious avoidant attachment. So, and it was first started with looking at just children, with babies, and how they focus in and attach to their caregivers. Johnson essentially takes attachment theory a step further and brings it into the relationships with adults. And her theory is that we don't stop needing secure attachments and secure relationships when we move into adulthood. We still need those secure attachments, and we look for that security from our closest romantic partner, from our spouse. So the idea that as adults, there used to be the idea that as adults we need to be independent, that if we depend on someone that we have some sort of issue, that we're codependent, that we're too attached. And this is sort of being, I think, looked at again or considered again, because we do need other people. And as humans, we are definitely interconnected and depend on each other in business and personal relationships and our marriage for sure. And so acting like we don't need other people, I think, and these theories state that essentially it's just a means of keeping people at an arm's length, and it's not actually forming intimate, secure relationships and attachments. So, because if you have a secure attachment, then you can, with, let's say, your parent, when you're a child, they can leave the room, they can come back, and you can regulate, and you can say, okay, I know you'll come back, I'm okay with this. Same thing as an adult. If you are very attached to your partner, if they leave and they come back and you're upset, or you don't really know how to handle it, you get frustrated. If they're away, you get jealous, you feel detached. This is all just a sort of continuation from childhood that, again, not that EFT asks you to analyze your childhood, but it's just to say the theory was born off the idea that this doesn't end in childhood, that attachment theory continues throughout adulthood, and that the primary relationship that we're looking for attachment in as adults is with a significant other, which is why we so, as a society, not everybody, but I think everybody wants love. So I do think every single person wants love, and whether that is in the conventional romantic relationship or if there are other ways. And of course, I don't think one relationship is the end all be all. So you can have your spouse, you can have your husband or your wife, but you also have these other relationships that also need to be securely attached, that you feel connected in the community, friendships, colleagues, your other family members, extended family members, your community, maybe your religious community, whatever it is that you're involved in, those people in the community, that's a huge thing for making you feel like you belong and that you're securely attached, I think, to your environment. So I think this goes even beyond that relationship, although that core relationship is the one that you're really looking to have the attachment, the secure attachment with on a day-to-day basis. So we move out of childhood with Bowlby's work and the 4 stages that he has. And then we talk about it. Essentially, I would say EFT, emotionally focused therapy, is looking at how to securely attach to your partner. That's my understanding of it. So we've recognized the demons and the demon dialogue. So what is this dance that we're doing? What's the spiral that we're in? Then we go to finding the raw spots, as I mentioned earlier. So we're looking at, okay, what are those immediate impulsive reactions? When are they being hit? What are those things that happen? And you have this 10 of 10 reaction that probably isn't warranted, right? Where your partner kind of looks at you and goes, what just happened? Like, what is up with you? What just happened here? And you feel like it's dramatic. You feel like you went from 0 to 10 really quickly. So you really visit and figure out the raw spots, both for yourself and your partner. And then hopefully the idea is that, and in this therapy, this is sort of an interesting approach that I'm not sure how I feel about saying it this way, but you find a common enemy in the cycle that you have, so that you two are working against your cycle rather than being victims of it. And the idea, I think, is to really bring people together toward a common enemy. So you're working toward a common enemy to beat it, essentially. But the idea is that you become a team on the issue. And again, it's not the context and it's not the issue that's the problem. It's the type of conversation, and that's outside of your dynamic. So you as a couple can choose and say, okay, we keep doing this spiral. We don't want to do this anymore. So we're going to decide when this starts happening again that we're going to pause. We're going to slow down. We might take a break. When we see that this is escalating, we know where it's headed. We've played out this dance 30 times, 50, 100 times, 1,000 times before. We're not going to go there. Let's de-escalate. Let's take a break. Let's take a breath. And then we can come back to the challenge and hopefully talk about it in a calm manner. And I'll share those 4 steps with you shortly. So let's just get through the 7 transforming conversations. Then I'll share the 4 steps of the EFT process, loosely, broad steps that you can work through when you're ready to revisit. So, and that's the 3rd conversation, is revisiting a rocky moment. So this is what you'll do if you work with an emotionally focused therapist. It's essentially a conversation that provides a platform for de-escalating the conflict and repairing the rifts in a relationship, or the ruptures, some therapists will call them, and build emotional safety. So rather than, you're sort of looking as 2 spectators trying to sort of piece together the situation, a rocky moment, one of these challenges about a ruler or a coffee cup, or a guy looked at a girl the wrong way, or he was late, or she started complaining, or whatever triggered it. I'm sure there are lots of rocky moments you can name out from your relationship. You take one of them and you have a conversation where you revisit that moment in a way to de-escalate the conflict and really repair the rupture that was caused in the relationship because of the conflict. And then you build emotional safety by seeing each other. In that conversation, you're really acknowledging what the other person is saying. So oftentimes, if you're feeling alone, unseen, or criticized, not good enough, you want the other person to say, hey, I see you. I see that you're trying. I see that you feel alone. I'm here. Right? So rather than trying to prove yourself or prove that you're not wrong or prove that you didn't do something wrong, right? Like it's sort of a perfect storm. If one person feels alone and frustrated, and isolated and sad, and the other person feels not good enough, then every time the person feels alone and is trying to reach out for connection, and they're doing it in a complaining or aggressive or angry way, and if the other person feels like, oh, I can't do anything about this, I'm not good enough, I can't handle this, and they just shut down, the other person feels more alone. So the more I do this, the more you do that, and around we go. So in this next conversation, we're revisiting a situation where that happened, and we're sort of taking it apart and repairing that feeling so that we understand that it's not about us. It's really 2 individuals having their own dialogue in their head about what's happening. And instead, you're connecting with the other person's core emotion of fear, of worry or shame or anger or sadness, or whatever the core fear is. You're connecting with that to say, hey, okay, I see that you feel alone. I totally can see how that could be the case when we just moved to a new city, you don't know anybody, and you feel scared. And I can totally see how that could come out. And so, and then you repair. And sometimes if you are in a couples therapy session together in person with each other, there is a component of physical touch, whether it's a hug or you're kind of holding each other from a physical perspective, really regulating, co-regulating the nervous system, breathing together and being held. So there's an emotional safety being made there also by physical touch, which does come up later as well. So then the next one is hold me tight. That is the fourth conversation. It's the heart of the program, if you will. And it's about moving partners into being more accessible, emotionally responsive, and deeply engaged. And there's a questionnaire that she has in the book, ARE, so accessible, responsive, and engaged. And you look at that because essentially anytime a partner is complaining, anytime a partner is frustrated, angry, any kind of reaction, or isolating themselves, so withdrawing, anytime there's this big emotional reaction that seems out of proportion with the situation, it's oftentimes that the partner needs you to be accessible, responsive, and engaged with them. They want engagement, they want attention, right? And so they're throwing a tantrum or they're criticizing you because they want attention, they want love, they want that engagement, responsiveness, essentially asking the question in their own way, are you here with me? Are you on my team? Are you on my side? Do you still love me? Like they're putting out a bid for connection. And if it's repeatedly shut down, that's one of the biggest indicators for the potential for divorce. And that's there's a lot of research done on that by the John Gottman Institute. They do a ton of research on bids for connection and marriage in general. So with a very interesting resource that's done amazing work with couples. So then you move into being more accessible, responsive, and emotionally engaged. And then you go to the next conversation, forgiving injuries. So while they may be forgiven, they might never disappear, but the idea is that it's integrated into the conversation so that you can forgive to whatever degree and then move past it. So this idea of renewal, and that if you can forgive, it will strengthen your bond. So of course, right, if you hold on to something for 20 years and then you hold over 20 years of marriage or 30 years, there are a lot of things that you could hold on to. And if you never forgive them, that's pretty hard to continue to be open to seeing your partner as a partner and continue to be loving and curious and excited and that kind of, and that's what we do in the beginning of relationships, right? We don't have all of these situations that we've had to forgive, that we've had to look past, that we've had to talk about. And that's why it's so exciting, because we're just learning this person. If we can keep, I think, this is my opinion, but if we can keep the curiosity, if we can keep this feeling that we're always getting to know our partner, then I think we can hopefully keep that excitement alive in a marriage for many years. Again, just my take, like we have to check in with me in 20 years. But that's what I see in partnerships, or I see a sense of duty, but then there's not always this like magical kind of loving connection. I see, of course, couples that are married for 20, 30, 40 years. And it's just because, well, I can't leave, or I don't feel like I can leave, or it doesn't feel safe to leave. And that's not the same as I'm in this really emotionally connected relationship where we learn together and we grow, and it's really loving and amazing. Next one is bonding through sex and touch. So we're doing this in all the sessions. If you're in emotionally focused therapy, you're doing this in all sessions around, like I said, the building emotional safety can be with physical touch if the relationship can handle that. It depends what the relationships, the challenges are and what the history is. But this particular conversation focuses specifically on sex and touch and how emotional connection really does create great sex, and good sex creates deeper emotional connection. And it is sort of this spiral again, right? Where if you don't have a fulfilling sex life, the emotional side feels like it's going away, and vice versa. If you're not emotionally connected, especially for women, I think they don't want to have sex if there's not verbal emotional connection. And yet men sometimes can also, and women, but mostly men, can feel like the way they emotionally connect is physically via sex. So it's an interesting conversation to be had for sure. And if there is strong emotional connection and that emotional safety we talk about in previous conversations, much easier to be physically intimate when you feel safe, for sure. Emotionally safe, that you're cared for, that you're loved. So the next and last one is keeping your love alive. So building on the understanding that love is a continual process of losing and finding emotional connection. So it's this kind of being on the emotional plane versus, let's say, the task-based plane, like I know that for sure, where, as a couple, there are a lot of things you have to do. You need to do your taxes and renew your car insurance and make sure the kids are okay, or cut the grass, or all these kind of tactical things, which is the tactical plane. Then there's this emotional plane, right? There's this emotional connection that we sort of ebb and flow in and out of. Right now, I'm connected with you, I'm doing this episode. There's not an emotional connection necessarily with my husband. But when I get off of recording this, I can text him and say, hey, I just recorded the episode. It went really well. I really enjoyed it. Here's what I talked about. And we can come back into connection. So the idea that keeping your love alive is keeping that connection alive as the pulse or the heartbeat of your relationship. Again, we talked about, right, one of those demon dialogues can be just complete withdrawal. And so that's where the relationship sort of withers and dies. And we know this about anything. As long as we're putting in effort at both sides and we keep coming back to the table and keep connecting, that's where things continue to blossom. So I think this makes sense. So that book is really interesting. And then I just want to walk you through, let's say, the 4 steps. I just want to make sure that I say it right. So the first step is, and this is in the EFT process. So often when you work with a therapist, there are, let's say, 8 to 12 sessions, maybe up to 20. There's a time limit on it, which I really appreciated, because sometimes in therapy, it feels like you hear these stories where people go to a therapist for a year or years and years, and the reason they went to the therapist isn't really resolved. And for me, that's just, it feels like a waste of time. It might not be, but again, EFT is not focused on rehashing your childhood or figuring out where every single challenge you have came from, although that's useful when it comes to those trigger points, right? Or those sort of sore spots for you. That's really important there to say, okay, maybe it's not coming from my partner. Maybe it is coming from a past relationship or a past friendship, or again, your parents or caregivers, so it's important to understand that, okay, this is a sore spot for me and it comes from X point, just so that you know that it's a sore spot. But it's not about analysis of all of these things that have happened. It's more about being able to restructure the bond that you have with your partner so that it's healthy, so that there's emotional connection, so you don't feel victims of this cycle, if you will, this dance that you continuously do, and you can emotionally connect. So stages and steps. First step is stabilization. So you do an assessment and de-escalation. So you're really assessing, okay, where are we at? Let's stabilize. Let's identify the negative cycle and the attachment issues. So as we talked about, it's based in attachment theory. So you access the underlying attachment emotion. So fear, sadness, anger, grief, shame. So these core emotions, you access those to understand what the basis of it is. So do you feel alone, or do you feel not good enough? Do you feel criticized? Well, what is that? That's fear. Is it anger? Is it sadness? What's there? What's that core emotion that's there? Then you reframe the problem into the cycle, the attachment need, and the fears, so that you are not your cycle. You're just a victim, quote unquote, of the cycle, is how they say it. But I would just say you're part of the cycle, but you are not the cycle, and you can choose to change it. So now you become allies, you and your husband or wife or partner, you become allies in moving away from this cycle that you easily get into. So the therapist would create a comfortable and stable environment. You talk about the hesitations that you have about therapy. You make sure you trust your therapist, of course, if you're working with someone. And then you're really getting into understanding the negative and positive interactions in the relationship to go through that process. Then you restructure the bond. So phase 2, so the change step. So you're assessing your needs and fears and models of yourself, and you're promoting acceptance by the other. So you expand this dance that you're doing so that you have within the therapy session itself, you're having experiences of your partner seeing you, acknowledging you. So for so long, you felt alone in your marriage, you felt misunderstood. And in the therapy session, because you're talking through one of these challenging scenarios and you're having your partner in the moment respond differently, you're building a new dance in the therapy session itself, because then it's like, oh, and you probably won't trust it the first time or the third time, to be honest with you. So the first time that, hey, I feel really alone. I feel like I can't tell you about my feelings. I feel like you don't want to listen to me. I feel scared that you just don't care. And for the first time, or one of the first times, you're hearing your partner say, wow, I never thought of it like that before. I'm so sorry. I can totally see how being alone would be so hard. Can I give you a hug? Can I hold your hand? And you really break down in that moment and cry and just think, oh my God, like you see me for the first time, maybe ever. And it's definitely strange and hard to accept the first time. And that's why there are multiple sessions in the change phase, because you need this to be proven to you again and again, because especially if you've been in a relationship for 10 years, 20 years, you're so used to that person not seeing you. You're so used to assuming that they don't care, that they don't see you, that they don't find you important. You're so used to that pattern running in your own head, those assumptions that you make. When I ask you for attention, you ignore me. That means you don't like me. You're so used to that thought pattern that when they're doing something different, when they're changing the way that they connect with you, for sure, in the beginning, you don't trust it. And that's the whole point of doing it in this structured manner with a third party, where you can then get used to it happening, and then you can try it out together, and then you reinforce it for years and years, and then it's your new pattern. And then you do become more aware and in control of your interactions, so that you can stop the old pattern from re-emerging. So in the beginning, a lot of couples, and I noticed this in my practice, they just don't even realize they're doing it. I have so many couples where they start layering it on. Well, you don't ask me to do anything with you. Well, I'm busy, and I don't even know what you want from me. Okay, but I'm just saying I want to have time together. Okay, but then what do you want to do? And right away, it's just the tone of voice, the rate of speech, the words being used, the body language. They move away from each other. I can see it in the screen, like they're both sitting further apart, like point after point where they just go down that rabbit hole. You can stop that pattern from the first comment of, well, okay, I just want to spend time with you. It's like, whoa, okay, what's happening here? What emotion is emerging here? Oh, okay, I'm getting kind of frustrated. I feel like I have to beg for attention. I'm getting worried that I don't deserve it. I feel not good enough. Like, okay, so the therapist really helps in that instance of calling out when this is sort of escalating, going back into your cycle, you're going back up that hill, if you will, into your dance. And then the third phase. Oh, sorry. So in this phase, you're looking at your needs and fears. You're promoting acceptance by the other person. As we said, you expand that dance. Then you structure emotional engagement and express attachment needs and wants. So that's what I was saying about, do you want a hug, or you talk about it, or you figure out you want reassurance, like you figure out what it is you're needing in that moment, and you can share it with them in a safe place. And then you have integration, consolidation. So these new positions in the cycle, you enact new stories. So you have different ways of handling when you'll notice, right? So if your partner starts, oh, you never take out the garbage, like what's wrong with you? You never do it right. You maybe as the other party can say, whoa, okay, it's not about the garbage. What's really going on here? And you can go and say, hey, are you having, what's going on with your day? Or yeah, I'm happy to do that. Can we just sit down and talk for a second? Or I hear stress in your voice. Is this our pattern starting again? And if you can do that in a calm and loving way, you can reflect and then redirect that conversation to have a new emotional experience where, your partner might then say, oh, yeah, I'm just so overwhelmed right now. There's so much on my plate. I feel like I can't get everything done. It's like, oh, I hear you. Would it help if I made dinner, or would you like to work late, or what can I do? What can we do to lighten the load? So then you're integrating this new way of dealing with problems within yourself and within the relationship. And you have this secure attachment bond that's formed through the therapy session. And then it's really a newfound strength, because then you're not victims of the cycle. You're not just always circling in that whirlwind spiral. You are slowing it down and taking control yourself, which is just magical, to say the least, because then it's not about you. You also understand your triggers and soft spots. You also understand your partners. You can maybe catch it. They can catch themselves. You can catch yourself. And over time, those inflections are just way less pronounced. So it's not this huge fight. It's kind of, okay, I'm getting riled up. Okay, it's not their fault. Let's talk about this. I'm feeling alone. I'm feeling frustrated. And you're accessing that core emotion rather than the content. I think that's the biggest distinction, which is so important. So if you found this content interesting, I would definitely encourage you to check out EFT, check out Sue Johnson and the book. I've loved this. We can get into more of this into each phase, I suppose, if this is valuable episode and people find it useful, I'm happy to look further into each phase of the EFT process or those core conversations. And if you did like the episode, please do like, review, subscribe, comment. Any action that you take to engage with me makes a world of difference for me to be able to continue to produce this show. So I want to thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. I love being able to make this content, and I'll see you again next week for some more interesting information on relationships, life, health, and how to be a leader in your own daily life.